and welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, September 11th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. Well, guys, all of Washington and really all of the country is in shock and mourning today for Charlie Kirk, the political activist and writer who was assassinated yesterday while speaking to college students in Utah. Carl, here's President Trump this morning speaking in remembrance of the anniversary of 9/11, but he also talked a little about his personal friendship with Kirk.
Our prayers are with his wonderful wife, Eric, and his beautiful children. Fantastic people they are. We miss him greatly, yet I have no doubt that Charlie's voice and the courage he put into the hearts of countless people, especially young people, will live on. I'm pleased to announce that I will soon be awarding Charlie Kirk posthumously the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The date of the ceremony will be announced, and I can only guarantee you one thing, that we will have a very big crowd.
Carl, a lot of people seem to be saying that even in an era marked by increasing political violence, this event cuts deep. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's right. I'll talk to Phil Wegman, our White House correspondent, later in a subsequent segment today. He was at the White House today. He was there for President Trump's announcement. You know, originally they were going to talk about 9/11. I think it was the Public Safety Commissioner, I'm not sure of the title, in Utah, but the top law enforcement officer in Utah said that this morning, normally on 9/11, we take time to remember the first responders and police officers lost on that terrible day. He said, but today we're hunting a murderer. And it seemed fitting to me because, and I guess the president felt this way too. This, 3,000 dead that day, not one, but this was an attack on the country. As it wasn't just an attack on a person. It was an attack on our idea that we have a right to speak freely on college campuses, no less. So the president was subdued, and I felt that way. I know you guys did too. We talked about this all day yesterday. My emotions, went from sadness to anger and back again. And I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah. Tom?
Well, I have to correct you, Andy. You said that, all across the country, people are mourning Charlie Kirk. And I wish that were true, but it's not true. In fact, there's some people in this country who decided it was the time to celebrate his death. And I hope that I just am too online, that I live too much online because it's part of what I do, and that's how I have to spend my days working, that I get a distorted view of reality. Because if not, I mean, it really did, when you saw, and they're libs of TikTok and some of these conservative X accounts were chronicling these posts and basically, screenshotting them and outing these people, and some of them have already been fired for their just lack of humanity. And that's part of what I was shaken by this, because it does cause you to lose faith in humanity if you think that there is a decent sized section of the country that is they're so warped that they actually were celebrating this guy's death. Whether you agree with him, disagree with him politically, nobody deserves to die for engaging in political debate. I mean, it's just, it should go without saying, but unfortunately it doesn't. And that's not the country we're living in right now. And that's too bad. But like Carl, I spent most of yesterday in shock. I'm actually more pissed off about it today, waking up and going through the news and having to aggregate some of the comments and video posts and all of that. I got pretty angry about it, and I think there are a lot of people in the country that are angry about it. And again, this isn't just you don't have to be a right-wing MAGA person to be upset at the fact that, because as Carl said, this was an attack on our democracy. This was somebody trying to silence a very prominent voice who they disagreed with politically, and that is just absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, I did want to play this clip from MSNBC, Carl. This was Katie Tur and Matthew Dowd reacting to the news on air in real time. And Dowd was subsequently fired by the network for these remarks. So here's part of that exchange.
One of the Doge employees was allegedly attacked in Washington, D.C. That's what Donald Trump used as justification to send in federal troops into Washington, D.C. to get things under control. You can imagine the administration using this as a justification for something.
We don't know if this was a supporter shooting their gun off in celebration, or so we have no idea about this. But following up on what was just said, he's been one of the most divisive, especially divisive younger figures in this, who is constantly sort of pushing this sort of hate speech.
So, Carl, just for the record, he did, Matthew Dowd issued an apology afterwards. He said that his thoughts and prayers were with Charlie Kirk, and he apologized for my tone and words. Let me be clear, I in no way intended for my comments to blame Kirk for this horrendous attack. Nonetheless, MSNBC turned around very quickly, and he's out of a job.
They fired him on the spot. I just don't, I want to, I'll talk about that. And I know Matthew Dowd. I met him when he worked for George W. Bush. And he's a very passionate person. And I think he would surprise me. He'd say intemperate things, first in favor of Bush, and then he turned against Bush. And he's been called, I think some liberal publication did a profile and said he was basically an opportunist. And I don't think that's right. I think he just sometimes talks before he thinks, but that's not what's needed now. What's needed now is people to think before they speak and to speak carefully. MSNBC basically fired him on the spot. This thing was in real time. I was like Tom, I was online all day yesterday, and conservatives were pointing this out. But I don't think the management of MSNBC needed any help. They were apparently offended themselves, and got rid of him. And there was another reporter with a Florida website who sent a text to Representative Fine, who's a conservative Republican, and said, something like, "So do you still favor open carry on college campuses?" And, we didn't even know if Charlie Kirk was alive or dead at that point. And Fine got angry and put it on X, told the guy, "Don't ever contact me again." That report has been suspended too. I think, Tom, I hear what you're saying, and I saw a lot of those things too, but I think that I almost drew the opposite conclusion. You had a couple of, these are people, you see these people and you never heard of them. They have 13 followers. They have more nose rings than followers, and, tattoos on their face. And these are some misanthropes who, cheer when somebody's killed. I think what we need to do is look to the leadership of the Democratic Party, with a couple of notable exceptions, Elizabeth Warren and J.B. Pritzker. Pritzker's that he's never fails to disappoint, but who blamed Trump for this. I think the Democrats were appalled by it, and said all the right things. And Gavin Newsom was indistinguishable from Fred Ryan, who's the head of the Reagan Library. And everybody said the same thing, Tom, that this is not, that we have to have the right to debate, that the violence is not an acceptable way to do business. And some people on CNN had David Urban and Paul Begala on, and they said, "We're personal friends. We rarely agree, but we're personal friends." And they both said the same thing. Later in the segment, later in the afternoon, Dana Bash had, Josh Gertheimer, Democrat from New Jersey, and the Republican senator from Oklahoma, very conservative. Their daughters are writing a children's book together, and they said, "We disagree on a lot, but we're friends." And I actually think if there's anything good that come out of it, Tom and Andy, it's that elected officials of both parties almost universally rose to the occasion. But a footnote, the Reagan Library, Fred Ryan put out this heartfelt statement, sort of what Reagan would have said, and it was beautiful. But Ben Shapiro was going to appear at the Reagan Library last night, and they canceled the appearance. They didn't say why, but I think they weren't sure that they could be responsible for his safety. So I think we have a ways to go here, but I was actually encouraged by the elected officials, how they responded, Tom.
Yeah, that's because you're very forgiving and kind and generous. I was less so. And by the way, Matthew Dowd deserved to be fired, and good for MSNBC, but Katie Tour deserves to be fired too. I mean, that hour and a half or 2 hours of coverage, she said 3 or 4 things that were outrageous, and where she was, talking about, and you played one of the clips of Trump's going to use this as justification for something. She called Charlie Kirk polarizing and a divisive figure, and over and over and over again, on and on and on. And so, she deserves to be, I think, let go as well, but that's not going to happen. I'm a little less forgiving of these politicians because I just don't believe them, Carl. I feel like there's a, and we talked about this yesterday. There is this thing on the left now where it's like, we've got to fight and we got to curse and we got to punch them in the mouth. And we got to all this sort of aggressive rhetoric, and it's. I don't want to say that they're all inciting violence, but they are, calling Trump a authoritarian, fascist, a Nazi, Hitler. He's a threat to democracy. He's an existential threat to the country. All of these over the top things. And those words over time, like, they have consequences. I mean, I just think they have influence. When you tell someone that you point at someone and you say, this person and these people are a threat to your life, threat to your way of life, threat to your existence. They hate you. They want to kill you, which is what a lot of the transgender folks have been saying. When you say that and you drill that into people's heads, how could you not expect someone to react violently to that? And if they actually believe that someone is a threat to their way of life. And
President Trump spoke to that, Tom. And
I know he did.
But
my point is, though, that Gavin Newsom and Nancy Pelosi and a lot of these Democrats, Carl, they say that all the time, and then something terrible happens, and then suddenly they're like, oh my gosh, we've got to, this was a terrible thing, and there's a lack of sincerity there, in my opinion, that just rings a little bit hollow, unfortunately.
I'm hoping this is a tipping point, is what I'm saying.
Well, that's because you're hopeful. I'm a little more cynical.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And when we come back, we are going to talk a little bit about 9/11. So don't go away. We'll be back right after this. Guys, it is the 24th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. It's a day that's marked with moments of silence and readings of the names of victims. It's kind of a measure of the passage of time, the way these lists are read by family members of the victims. Some have grown up, and it's striking to see them continue this tradition. They become adults. And then there are others who read these lists that are born after 9/11 but take part. Actually, there's a lottery that's held to decide which family members are going to do this. But Carl, it is a reminder of how big an impact this one event has had on these families, but really the whole country. So what are you thinking about today? We've got Charlie Kirk, we've got 9/11. It's not a happy time.
No, and I was thinking about how this country marks this day, and it's impressive in its way. I was thinking, this is 24 years later, and this was the most serious attack on our country ever, really. But it was the only thing that rivaled it was Pearl Harbor. I was a kid in 1965, which would have been 24 years after Pearl Harbor, and nobody was reading the names of these sailors. Nobody was talking about the guy's body still in the USS Arizona. We were all into other things. Politics had moved on. The culture had moved on. I actually think it's impressive that we do this, and I was, and the three of us all remember that day vividly, 9/11, but I think it's important to keep it alive and to keep the spirit of alive. And I just, what you'd hope is that these contemporary, the young, it's important to teach these young people about this, especially the ones who run around, with Hamas flags and doing stupid things like that. It's important that they know this country was attacked and by whom.
Yeah. Tom, I was struck, this was according to CBS News, 122.4 million Americans were not born yet when that attack happened. That struck me. It's a big number.
Makes me feel like a geezer.
Yeah, I know. Well, I remember that day because my daughter was a week old, my third daughter, and I was in Washington, D.C. at the time. But again, what are your thoughts today? Sad day in many ways.
Yeah. And I remember exactly where I was when I saw the plane go into the first tower. My wife was working in downtown Chicago. She had gotten on the train. She worked in a high rise on like the 50th floor, 45th floor or something of like a high rise downtown Chicago. And by the time they got down there, they were evacuating the city and everybody was turning around and coming home. It was also, this is Real Clear Politics. This is our 25th year of operation. So we started the website a year and a half. It was April in 2000. I think, when we first started going. But so we were a really tiny, operation. And I just remember, prior to 9/11, we were putting up, I don't know, 5 or 6 stories a day. And there was just such there was initially, this sort of fog of war, this panic. Who did this? Why did they do this? What's going on? And then, in the days and weeks that followed, there was this insatiable thirst for information and about Al Qaeda and all of this stuff. And it was a real turning point in our history as a media company, because we started putting up, information around the clock. We got a ton more visitors because people were flocking online to find news and information about what had happened. And obviously it was a huge turning point for the country. You look back and you look at all of the things that took place, afterwards, mistakes that were made. But it totally changed our country's outlook on foreign policy, domestic policy, surveillance, Patriot Act, all of that stuff. I mean, it was a monumental event that we still feel the repercussions from.
Well,
So,
you guys
and
are both,
I agree with Carl. I'm glad to see that we market every year the way that we do. And even news organizations, and I bash them all the time, and some are worse than others in this regard, but you will still find, editorials on 9/11 and remembrances in a lot of the major outlets and papers, even on a day like today, where there's obviously a lot of other news that's sort of crowding it out.
Yeah.
well, you guys remember, Andy, they sang, the members of Congress got together on the steps of the Capitol and sang America, God Bless America. And I contrasted that with yesterday on when Speaker Mike Johnson called for a prayer, a silent prayer, and it devolved quickly into a shouting match between Democrats and Republicans on the floor of the House. So our politics are not getting better to the things we talked about in the first segment. They're getting less civil. But again, I'm hoping that some of these events that we're going through now can be an inspiration to people to remember they're the better angels.
Yeah. There's two things I think that always come back to me. One is the weather that day. I was in
Oh.
Washington, D.C. I was at the Tabard Inn, which is on
Hmm.
N Street, and I was having sort of coffee outside. I was meeting with a client, I guess, and the weather was impeccable. And when we have one of those days, even now, I think back to that. It's sort of like 9/11 weather. And the other thing is my office was right on Connecticut Avenue, and people streaming out of the city on foot that day.
Right.
And then afterwards, all up and down Connecticut Avenue, the flags. There was just this outpouring of patriotism. Really was a remarkable event. I don't think you can say too much about it. I'm glad we are talking about it now. And we'll continue to talk about it. And next year is the 25th anniversary. I'm sure that will be even a bigger marking of the event. Tom, we did get some more economic numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics today. According to the BLS, inflation rose 0.4% in August, 2.9% over the past 12 months. Not a terrible inflation number, but above the Fed's target. And some see this inflation as a sign that Trump's tariffs are beginning to be felt. You're always telling us to wait and see. Are you ready to say we have waited enough and now we're seeing?
No. I mean, I'm looking at the chart, it's like 2.3 in April, 2.4 in May, 2.7 June, 2.7 July, 2.9 in August. So, but down from 3% in January. So, I mean, it's been ticking, inflation rate's been ticking up, but I mean, this is basically in line with Wall Street's expectations. The Dow seems to be doing just fine, and the sentiment seems to be that this is not going to derail what is likely to be a rate cut when the Fed gets together. So it's still an issue for Trump. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we talk about this, the polling on this, because once again, Trump said he was going to solve this on day one. You get in, prices will go down. Well, they have and they haven't. I mean, energy has gone down maybe a little bit. Gas has been a little lower than it was, but other things are still expensive. People are still feeling that in their daily lives. His numbers on those on inflation are low and have sunk since he took office, and so it continues to be a political problem for him. But I wouldn't, go running out the door with my hair on fire saying it's the tariffs are coming, the tariffs are coming. I mean, uh, I don't think the data supports that just yet.
Not yet. Carl?
Well, I don't see how they could be good for the economy.
Okay, but but not necessarily bad.
Um, Here's my question, Andy, and I don't mean to be an anti-intellectual, but are these numbers any good? You know, this
We should
idea
always
that,
start with that question when we talk
Yes.
about these numbers,
well,
especially
the
from
idea that the Bureau of Labor Statistics downgraded the jobs created during Biden's administration by 1.5 million jobs. So
Well,
all the
911,000 just in the past year.
yeah, yeah,
So-
yeah. So that's a statistic that's mind-boggling. So they're off by 300%. I mean, so how do and then and I pity Jay Powell, the chairman of the Fed, not because Donald Trump's called him every name in the book, although I'm sure, based on the president's speech yesterday, he's going to stop calling Jay Powell names and he's going to engage in a completely civil manner. Not for that reason. I pity him because he's got to make decisions about whether to cut the interest rate based on this really crappy and incomplete information. And so, we can debate it, but the whole thing has an Emily Letitia quality to it, Is that a reference? Do you guys know? Why are we talking about flea erections? If the little things want to have erections, why can't they? That's free elections, Letitia. Oh, never mind. That's from Saturday Night Live back in the day. But that's my point. We're going to go on and talk about what Trump ought to do, what Jay Powell ought to do, how it cuts politically, based on these numbers that we're not sure that they could be wildly off.
Well, I think that the inflation numbers, not to come to BLS's defense, but I think they are probably better. It's a very different statistical model they use, different survey, everything than the BLS numbers. There's real problems getting labor numbers correct now. Less
Got to
problem.
go to war with the numbers you have, Carl.
Yeah, exactly. And
that's a Don Rumsfeld reference for you Gen Z listeners or millennials.
But if you dig in a bit, Tom, the food numbers are bad. That's 3.2% year over year for food, and coffee is up 3.6% thanks to these tariffs, probably against Brazil.
You know what?
Well,
Tom
that
is
is
going to be
unacceptable.
Yeah.
With the amount of coffee I drink,
I was going to say
just...
Tom's close to a single issue voter on the price of coffee.
Now, what about the price of Diet Coke? Because that's where Carl would be feeling some sensitivity.
Well,
that and Scotch. How's your
French wine too.
Yes, Scotch. If there's going to be a tariff on stuff from the UK, yeah, I guess so.
But the Fed Open Markets Committee, back to the topic at hand, they do meet next week, and they will be voting on whether to cut short-term interest rates. That's what they do, and by how much. And Tom, this federal judge has ruled that Fed Governor Lisa Cook, who Trump has tried to fire, can participate in that vote while she's fighting to keep her job. The judge is Gia Cobb, Gia Cobb. I'm not sure I've got her name right, but she's a Biden appointee. She says
shocker.
Cook is likely to prevail in her lawsuit to keep her job, and thus she can stay there and she can vote.
So the judge is making a judgment about her case, saying she's likely to prevail, therefore she can. I mean,
well, but that's the standard, though. That's the standard.
Right. That is the standard.
Because the judge has to make a decision whether to intercede or not. And the decision and one of the wait. And if you're likely to prevail, that's one factor the judge can consider. But I don't think I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think she's likely to prevail. I think the Supreme Court, this seems to me to be kind of a willful misreading of the record. The Supreme Court has given the executive branch great leeway in firing for cause. I think she's likely not to prevail. But she had to make a decision one way or the other, Tom, and this is the more conservative thing because you can't reinstate her back. So,
am I wrong that Lisa Cook could have at any point in this presented documents to show that this was, a mistake? I mean,
Innocent until proven guilty, Tom.
Yeah.
yeah, but she hasn't done anything to prove her innocence. She hasn't done anything to like. She's just said these allegations are political, and she, screw Trump, but I'm staying in my job. But has she produced anything to?
She has not engaged on. She has not engaged on the merits of the allegation, which is
No,
that
but her lawyers have said
she
that there-
fudged her mortgage papers.
Right, but her
Go ahead, Andy.
lawyers have said that there was no fraud. So her representatives have spoken to this and, in essence, denied the allegations. I don't know how Tom. You're saying how do you prove a negative here? I think that's the problem with the position you're taking. She really hasn't been accused of anything. She hasn't been charged with anything, and you're saying she should knock down these accusations when we don't know the full extent of those accusations.
Well, I mean, listen, that's what I would do if I was innocent. Someone accused me of something, I'd go out and have a press conference and be like, "You're full of shit." And here's
here's the documents to prove it.
Exactly.
Here's
Isn't that
the
what most
receipts.
people would do?
I don't.
I mean,
know.
I guess you could take the fifth and hunker down and lawyer up, but seems to be what she's done.
Well, Abby Lowell gets paid for a longer period of time the longer this goes on.
I got about a minute left here. This vote is coming up, and just the other wrinkle on it is this guy Stephen Marin is Trump's appointee. He's going to be. It looks like he will be confirmed by the Senate on Monday, and he'll be able to vote on Tuesday. So it's a very interesting sort of dynamic that's going to happen. There's 7 members who vote, and 2 of them will be sort of involved in these. Marin's not involved in controversy, but he's new to the job. He'll be on the job 24 hours. So something that will be worth taking a close look at next week. Anyway, we're going to take a break now. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And when we come back, Carl's going to talk to Phil Wegman, who's been over at the White House all day covering what's going on there. Don't go away.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics. It's a grim day here, really. It's 24th anniversary of 9/11. We talked about that in an earlier segment, Phil. I'm talking now to Phil Wegman, our White House correspondent. You're listening to us on Sirius XM radio or maybe watching on our podcast. Philip, I want to start. You're on pool duty today. Most of our listeners, they follow this station. POTUS is actually a play on word, politics of the United States, President of the United States. But take 30 seconds, tell our listeners what pool duty is. And then I want to walk you through Trump's morning and what the president did to celebrate 9/11, and then I want to talk to you about Charlie Kirk, who you knew personally. So let's start with pool duty. Tell me what pool duty is.
So pool duty, it is so called because until Richard Nixon decided to give a dedicated press space for the press corps, we were actually out and about. There wasn't anywhere for reporters and journalists to gather, but during his administration, he converted the old swimming pool that was built for FDR, who was suffering from polio. He converted that into press space. So they drained the pool. That's where they put the office space for reporters. And that's where the name pool comes from. Now, the press pool has a very specific meaning, though, today, which is of the 200-300 or so reporters who cover the president on a daily basis, obviously only so many can go travel with him. And so that's on a rotation. And when you are the print pool reporter, you are the reporter's reporter. It is your job to get quotes and color out to your colleagues as quickly as possible so that they can file their stories.
Phil, so are you in the White House basement right now? Is that where you are?
I am in the White House basement right now. That explains the very dark lighting.
Well, that's where the swimming pool used to be, right?
Indeed.
And you are more than that. If you're listening on Sirius XM radio, you wouldn't know this, but if you're watching on our podcast, Phil's kind of dark. He's in a dark room. Why is he in a dark room? He's in the Voice of America, old Voice of America booth in the White House basement. But President Trump, in his infinite wisdom, has gutted Voice of America. He's tried to close it down. I'm on record as saying that I think it was a valuable service, and that Michael Bramowitz, who was the head of Voice of America, and still is technically, because this is in litigation, is a great American and a great defender of the free press and human rights. I actually think the Trump administration could have worked with him, but that's why Phil's dark. Tell us, or let's start. I said we'll get to Charlie Kirk in a minute. It's just a very sad story to me, and it actually makes me angry. We'll talk about that. But 24th anniversary of the attacks of 9/11. And give us the mood at the White House today.
This is a double day of mourning for this administration. They are acknowledging the 24th anniversary of 9/11, and the president was there at the Pentagon, where each of the more than 100 names of individuals, civilians and military personnel who died on that day 24 years ago was read aloud, and a bell was rung after every single name. Then you had the president give remarks. And these are remarks that are always planned, they're always on the schedule as presidents commemorate that day. But this time was a little bit different. Donald Trump began by announcing that he was going to be giving Charlie Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And I think that Kirk's passing is especially important if you want to understand the Donald Trump saga. This White House, they're in mourning because so many of the senior staff here saw him as a little brother. He was someone who was always on the campaign trail with them. He was energizing the youth vote. He had a
But maybe
direct
younger
line.
brother, not little brother, because he was like 6'4", but
Indeed, indeed. And he was, in contact with everyone in the cabinet as well as the vice president. He was someone who behind the scenes was pushing Trump to select Vance as his VP. Then during the presidential transition, you had Charlie Kirk, who was vetting a lot of the staff candidates who wanted to work in the administration. So they all appreciated him. They knew him. And then some of the younger staff, I'm talking about the ones who might just be starting their political career, the younger millennials, the Gen Z folks, they looked up to him as an older brother. And his passing is being felt here at the White House in a particularly raw and difficult way.
yeah, we talked in our earlier segment, Phil, we played a clip from President's remarks giving the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I have to tell you, this thing's hit me the way differently than usual. I mean, I scant, maybe over time that'll matter, but boy, that seems like scant consolation to his widow and those two little children who loved him so much. But having said that, he didn't just take away Charlie Kirk from his family. He took him away from the country, and he took him away from the Republican Party and conservative movement. I guess that's the intent. I suppose that's the intent of it. That's why this is domestic terrorism. That's why it's an attack really on our system of government, not just on this one person. President Trump, he did that thing from the Oval Office where he spoke about, he was measured for him. He said a lot of the right things, but one of the things, he said we have to watch our language. He said, they call us Nazis and they call us dictators. But the president himself, Donald Trump, since he burst on this, even before, he was famous for picking fights with Rosie O'Donnell. He's got this sort of New York insult comic sensibility. And the president himself has used a lot of the incendiary language. He's called Democrats vermin and radicals and communists and these things. Is there any sense there? I remember after the president himself was nearly killed in Butler, Pennsylvania, we thought we'd get a kinder, gentler Trump. That didn't really happen. Is there any sense there that the president and his side needs to soften the rhetoric and lower the temperature themselves? Or is it more like, are they more taking their cue, from Jesse Waters, who said, we're at war with these people? I know it's early, Phil, it's less than 24 hours.
It's early.
But what sense do you get?
What I noticed from the president today was sadness. This is not an emotion that often registers in Donald Trump, but he did love Charlie Kirk. This is someone who was very close to him. And we're going to see how this reaction shapes up. We've already seen the administration crack down on crime in Washington, D.C. after a DOJ staff member was mugged. We've seen the administration really lean on colleges and Ivy Leagues previously, but that was for what they did overall. I think this is personal because it happened to an almost family member, and we'll see. What does he do? What is his vision of going after these NGOs that he sees as being problematic? I think that the difference in this case, though, and you're absolutely right, there's no one who relishes counterpunching more than Donald Trump, but I think the difference in this case is, if we do look at some of this political violence, it has come from Republicans, it has come from Democrats, but there seems to be a relishment from the online left, particularly some of the younger activists. I'm thinking back to the United Healthcare CEO, his shooter. You had Taylor Lorenz on CNN pointing out that he was very handsome and idealistic. You had a GoFundMe page set up for his defense. You had all sorts of merchandise from T-shirts to prayer candles suddenly available for purchase online. That seems to be a bit different than the political violence that Republicans have seen from their side. I mean, they denounced it, and then there wasn't a groundswell of glorification. I do think, though, you're raising a really important point here, which is, what is the response from the conservative base? Because I've already seen some say, well, look, you don't tell me to watch my tone or to change the type of conversation, because Charlie Kirk was doing exactly that. He was having a debate. He was trying to be civil, and certainly, Charlie could, give as good as he received. But what strikes me here, and I think Ben Domenech had a really good piece, Charlie Kirk saw as his mission holding back a revolution. And he said this explicitly. He was arguing that the best way for the United States to continue and to survive when you had extremists on the left, and I don't think he would acknowledge them on the right, but they're there, was to have people have arguments and have debate so that we could settle this the good old-fashioned American way, in the town square, and not through violence. And so that's, I think, a really bitter and tragic irony here, that he lost his life engaging in First Amendment speech. And we'll see if the right, is willing to honor his memory by returning to that First Amendment speech, or if, some will say, no, the time for discussion is over.
Philip, take us a moment now. You knew Charlie Kirk personally. You wrote some early stories about him. You did a long profile of him. I fought you on it. I said, oh, he's not important enough. Well, you were right and I was wrong. He was certainly important enough, and you did a very good story. And you did other pieces about how the Trump campaign and the RNC basically relied on Turning Point America to turn out the vote, and they did it. So, professionally, Charlie Kirk delivered the goods, but you knew him personally. Tell us a little bit. Tell people who don't know him what he was like.
So Charlie was an all-around nice guy. And the reason I say this with some authority is that I got under his skin, and I got under the skin of his staff, because I wrote some pretty aggressive stories, some of them that were especially critical of the early days of Turning Point USA, reported stories about how their early conferences were, something out of Animal House. But to his credit, I think what made Charlie unique is that he didn't just dismiss criticism, he evaluated it. And as a result, I think from some of those early stories, they beefed up security at their conferences. They had their students sign a pledge of conduct. And, I know that he wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but he was always good-natured. His staff was always professional. They quibbled with some of our stories, but Charlie always picked up the phone if you had a question. And this is, I think, something that is going to be felt in the press corps. You might not imagine a lot of reporters reaching out to Charlie Kirk, but I guarantee you, from the New York Times to the Washington Post to CNN, and myself included, when we're looking for a guide to the universe that Donald Trump created, you would reach out to Charlie Kirk, because he didn't just understand it, he helped shape and create that universe. And the tragedy of this life cut short is he was going to do this for the rest of his life. He loved this.
Phil, he's close to your age. He was 31. He had, and I read a piece, recently said, "Oh, Charlie Kirk could be the RNC chief someday." Well, hell, I read that he could be president for all we know. He was a charismatic guy, young, got an early start at 18, didn't bother going to college, but
Well, just to this point, I think that what is important to remember about Charlie Kirk right now, as we look at the fallout of all of this, is that his assassination is not just a political story. It's a cultural one as well. This is the first online influencer who has lost his life in this way. And whether you loved him or you hated him, you felt that you knew him, because there was this parasocial relationship where he talked directly to students on campus and then directly to people on the other side of a computer screen. And already we have seen Chris Pratt, the movie star, Pat McAfee, the sports announcer and former NFL player, the New York Yankees. They are all acknowledging this individual. It's not just politics. I think that what Charlie did, which, whether or not you agree with his arguments, you can't deny that what he did is he moved this Tea Party spirit that used to be something that, you know, the older generation really appreciated, the boomers. And he made conservatism and populism kind of cool. And so, you know, I think that the verification of that is all of the fraternity houses that are hanging banners outside of their doors now in memory of him, and all of these folks who are generally non-political remembering him.